Ugh, I need to do dishes and everything else. Ooh. That's pretty close. Can't really get any closer. Alright. You guys, welcome to the live stream. It doesn't get any more exciting than this, by the way. I'm gonna sit here, carve some pumpkins, and that's it. I'm trying to think if there's anything I shouldn't have on the screen, but I don't think there's anything. Just garbage. Alright. I know we're getting a little bit late, but we're gonna be listening to The Telltale Heart. You know. How's your temperature in the spooky season? And apparently it's gonna rain tomorrow, so I don't think I'm getting any trick-or-treaters, unfortunately. That and trunk-or-treats killed them. Ugh. Alright. Let us begin. I think this is the right one. Find out in 2 minutes. Longest fucking intro. There we go.
Nervous. Dreadfully nervous. Eileen and Em.
Okay! What the fuck?
Get up to 40% off trees
And we're in a
during
commercial.
Michael's Start the Season sale.
And what is the Telltale Heart? Not the X-rated version.
Collectible ornaments
Happy Halloween! We're getting scary.
at Michael's.
It's TDs or something. Okay, stop breathing, just get reading. Are you just gonna be normal? Of course not.
It's late. Time for your story, I think. My name is Christopher Lee, and these are Edgar Allan Poe's Gothic Dreams. True. Nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. But why will you say that I am bad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing, acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. Voice cold, I had no desire. It was his eye. He had the eye of a vulture. A pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man. And thus rid myself of the eye forever. You should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded. With what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. lantern, all closed so that no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Would a madman have been so wise as this? When my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for several long nights, every night, just at midnight. I found the eye always closed, as it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea. Perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. His room was as black as pitch, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on, steadily, steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's up there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was sitting up in bed, listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. I knew it had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He'd been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He'd been saying to himself, "Oh, it's nothing but the wind in the chimney. It's only a mouse crossing the floor. Or it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I'd waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, and so at length.
So this is just the murderer's manifesto.
The thread of the spider fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else in the old man's face or person, for I directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. Had I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased by fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier to courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless, got louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say. Louder every moment. You mark me well. I've told you that I'm nervous. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. And for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder, louder. I thought the heart must burst. New anxiety seized me. The sounds would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him.
How'd you kill him?
I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length, it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe to you the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I'd been too wary for that. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I'd been welcomed. The shriek, I said, was my own, in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed, in the enthusiasm of my confidence. I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale. I wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and chatted. The ringing became more distinct. I talked freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and became the ringing more distinct, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt, I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased. And what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor, to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. What could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Louder, 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 louder! Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew they were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now again, hark! Louder, louder, louder! Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more! I meant the deed! Tear up the planks here! Here! It is the beating of his hideous heart! This is Christopher Lee, wishing you a very good night.
Edgar Allan Poe's Gothic Tales are a unique production for BBC Radio 2.
Now, did I walk away at the end? That was very short. I thought that would be a lot longer. I'll leave you for tomorrow. Or the day after tomorrow, I should say.
It's late. Time for your story, I
Oh
think.
dear.
My name is Christopher Lee, and these are Edgar Allan Poe's Gothic Tales.
The bad pumpkin. That's okay. He just has to survive tomorrow. No, don't do dumb things that'll get you killed. Yeah, it's only if I got access to it.
Nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been angered. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not
I just wanted to hear the last bit because I walked away.
in my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now again, hark! Louder, 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 louder! Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more! I meant the deed! Tear up the planks here! Here! It is the beating of his hideous heart!
It wouldn't be good to heist cracks under pressure.
This is Christopher Lee, wishing you a very good night.
That really was it. Okay.
Edgar Allan Poe's Gothic Tales are a unique production for BBC Radio 2.
Alright, let's look at the monkey's paw.
Chilling tales for dark nights.
See how rotten this one is on the inside.
The Monkey's Paw by W. W. Jacobs. Narrated by Peter Bishop. 1. Without, the night was cold and wet, but in the small parlour of Laburnum Villa, the blinds were drawn and the fire burned brightly. Father and son were at chess.
It's a classic.
The former, who possessed ideas about the game involving radical changes, putting his king in such sharp and unnecessary perils that it even provoked comment from the white-haired old lady knitting placidly by the fire.
Hark at that wind.
Said Mr. White, who, having seen a fatal mistake after it was too late, was amiably desirous of preventing his son from seeing it.
I'm listening.
Said the latter, grimly surveying the board as he stretched out his hand.
Check. I should hardly think he'd come tonight.
Said his father, with his hand poised over the board.
Mate,
Replied the son.
that's the worst of living so far out.
Bawled Mr. White, with sudden and unlooked-for violence.
Of all the beastly, slushy, out-of-the-way places to live in, this is the worst. Halfway's a bog and the road's a torrent. I don't know what people are thinking about. I suppose because only 2 houses in the road are let, they think it doesn't matter.
Never mind, dear.
Said his wife soothingly.
Perhaps you'll win the next one.
Mr. White looked up sharply, just in time to intercept a knowing glance between mother and son. The words died away on his lips, and he hid a guilty grin in his thin grey beard.
There he is.
Said Herbert White, as the gate banged to loudly and heavy footsteps came toward the door. The old man rose with hospitable haste, and, opening the door, was heard condoling with the new arrival. The new arrival also condoled with himself, so that Mrs. White said,
Tut-tut.
and coughed gently as her husband entered the room, followed by a tall, burly man, beady of eye and rubicund of visage.
Sergeant Major Morris.
He said, introducing him. The sergeant major shook hands, and taking the proffered seat by the fire, watched contentedly while his host got out whiskey and tumblers and stood a small copper kettle on the fire. At the third glass, his eyes got brighter, and he began to talk. The little family circle regarding with eager interest this visitor from distant parts, as he squared his broad shoulders in the chair and spoke of the wild scenes and doughty deeds, of wars and plagues and strange peoples.
21 years of it.
Said Mr. White, nodding at his wife and son.
When he went away, he was a slip of a youth in the warehouse. Now look at him.
He don't look to have taken much harm.
Said Mrs. White, politely.
I'd like to go to India myself.
Said the old man.
Just to look around a bit, you know.
Better where you are.
Said the sergeant major, shaking his head. He put down the empty glass, sighing softly, shook it again.
I should like to see those old temples and fakirs and jugglers.
Said the old man.
What was that you started telling me the other day about a monkey's paw or something, Morris?
Nothing.
Said the soldier, hastily.
Leastways, nothing worth hearing.
Monkey's paw?
Said Mrs. White, curiously.
Well, it's just a bit of what you might call magic, perhaps.
Said the sergeant major, offhandedly. His 3 listeners leaned forward eagerly. The visitor absent-mindedly put his empty glass to his lips and then set it down again. His host filled it for him.
To look at it,
Said the sergeant major, fumbling in his pocket.
it's just an ordinary little paw dried to a mummy.
He took something out of his pocket and proffered it. Mrs. White drew back with a grimace, but her son, taking it, examined it
I
curiously.
should have hollowed it out before I started
And what
cracking
is there
face, but I
special
didn't.
about it? Inquired Mr. White, as he took it from his son, and having examined it, placed it upon the table.
It had a spell put on it by an old fakir,
Said the sergeant major.
a very holy man. He wanted to show that fate ruled people's lives and that those who interfered with it did so to their sorrow. He put a spell on it so that 3 separate men could each have 3 wishes from it.
His manner was so impressive that his hearers were conscious that their light laughter jarred somewhat.
Well, why don't you have 3,
What?
sir?
Said Herbert White, cleverly. The soldier regarded him in the way that Middle Age is wont to regard presumptuous youth.
I have.
He said quietly, and his blotchy face whitened.
And did you really have the 3 wishes granted?
Asked Mrs. White.
I did.
Said the sergeant major, and his glass tapped against his strong teeth.
And has anybody else wished?
Persisted the old lady.
The first man had his 3 wishes, yes.
Was the reply.
I don't know what the first 2 were, but the third was for death. That's how I got the paw.
His tones were so grave that a hush fell upon the group.
If you've had your 3 wishes, it's no good to you now then, Morris.
Said the old man at last.
What do you keep it for?
The soldier shook his head.
Fancy, I suppose.
He said slowly.
I did have some idea of selling it, but I don't think I will. It has caused enough mischief already. Besides, people won't buy. They think it's a fairy tale, some of them. And those who do think anything of it want to try it first and pay me afterward.
If you could have another 3 wishes,
Said the old man, eyeing him keenly.
would you have them?
I don't know.
Said the other.
I don't know.
He took the paw and, dangling it between his forefinger and thumb, suddenly threw it upon the fire. White, with a sudden cry, stooped down and snatched it off.
Better let it burn.
Said the soldier solemnly.
If you don't want it, Morris,
Said the other.
give it to me.
I won't.
Said his friend doggedly.
I threw it on the fire. If you keep it, don't blame me for what happens. Pitch it on the fire again like a sensible man.
The other shook his head and examined his new possession closely.
We need to be holiday ready early this year, so let's start with some low price decor, like this holiday classic. We have colorful maximalists to warm neutrals. What do you think?
You're definitely getting maximalist.
Really? Because I was feeling more classic.
Closely,
How do you do it?
he inquired.
Hold it up in your right hand and wish aloud.
Said the sergeant major.
But I warn you of the consequences.
An example would help.
Arabian Nights.
Said Mrs. White, as she rose and began to set the supper.
Don't you think you might wish for 4 pairs of hands for me?
Her husband drew the talisman from pocket, and then all 3 burst into laughter as the sergeant major, with a look of alarm on his face, caught him by the arm.
If you must wish,
He said gruffly.
wish for something sensible.
Mr. White dropped it back in his pocket and, placing chairs, motioned his friend to the table. In the business of supper, the talisman was partly forgotten, and afterward the 3 sat listening in an enthralled fashion to a second installment of the soldier's adventures in India.
If the tale about the monkey's paw is not more truthful than those he has been telling us,
Said Herbert as the door closed behind their guest, just in time for him to catch the last train.
we shan't make much out of it.
Did you give him anything for it, Father?
Inquired Mrs. White, regarding her husband closely.
A trifle.
He said, colouring slightly.
He didn't want it, but I made him take it. And he pressed me again to throw it away.
Likely.
Said Herbert with pretend horror.
Why, we're going to be rich and famous and happy. Wish to be an emperor, father, to begin with. Then you can't be henpecked.
He darted round the table, pursued by the maligned Mrs. White, armed with an antimacassar. Mr. White took the paw from his pocket and eyed it dubiously.
I don't know what to wish for, and that's a fact.
He said slowly.
It seems to me I've got all I want.
If you only cleared that house, you'd be quite happy, wouldn't you?
Said Herbert, with his hand on his shoulder.
Well,
Wish for £200 then. That'll just do it.
His father, smiling shamefacedly at his own credulity, held up the talisman, and his son, with a solemn face somewhat marred by a wink at his mother, sat down at the piano and struck a few impressive chords.
I wish for £200,
said the old man distinctly. A fine crash from the piano greeted the words, interrupted by a shuddering cry from the old man. His wife and son ran toward him.
It moved,
he cried, with a glance of disgust at the object as it lay on the floor.
as I wished it twisted in my hand like a snake.
Well, I don't see the money.
Said his son as he picked it up and placed it on the table.
And I bet I never shall.
It must have been your fancy, Father,
said his wife, regarding him anxiously. He shook his head.
I carved them, then I
Never
have to
mind
cook
though,
them.
there's no harm done. You gave me a shock all the same.
They sat down by the fire again while the two men finished their pipes. Outside, the wind was harder than ever, and the old man started nervously at the sound of a door banging upstairs. A silence unusually depressing settled upon all three, which lasted until the old couple rose to retire for the night.
I expect you'll find the cash tied up in a big bag in the middle of your bed.
Said Herbert as he bade them good night.
And something horrible squatting up on top of the wardrobe, watching you as you pocket your ill-gotten gains.
He sat alone in the darkness, gazing at the dying fire and seeing faces in it. The last face was so horrible and so simian that he gazed at it in amazement. It got so vivid that, with a little uneasy laugh, he felt on the table for a glass containing a little water to throw over it. His hand grasped the monkey's paw, and with a little shiver, he wiped his hand on his coat and went up to bed. 2. In the brightness of the wintry sun next morning as it streamed over the breakfast table, he laughed at his fears. There was an air of prosaic wholesomeness about the room which it had lacked on the previous night, and the dirty, shriveled little paw was pitched on the sidewalk with a carelessness which betokened no great belief in its virtues.
I suppose all old soldiers are the same.
Said Mrs. White.
The idea of our listening to such nonsense. How could wishes be granted in these days? And if they could, how could £200 hurt you, Father?
I drop on you from the sky?
Said a frivolous Herbert.
Morris said that things happen so naturally
Said his father.
that you might, if you so wished, attribute it to coincidence.
Well, don't break into the money before I come back.
Said Herbert as he rose from the table.
I'm afraid it'll turn you into a mean, avaricious man, and we will have to disown you.
His mother laughed, and following him to the door, watched him down the road, and returning to the breakfast table, was very happy at the expense of her husband's credulity. All of which did not prevent her from scurrying to the door at the postman's knock, nor prevent her from referring somewhat shortly to retired Sergeant Major Sir Bibulous habits when she found that the post had brought a tailor's bill.
Herbert will have some more of his funny remarks, I expect, when he comes home.
She said as they sat at dinner.
I dare say.
Said Mr. White, pouring himself out some beer.
But for all that, the thing moved in my hand, that I'll swear to.
You thought it did.
Said the old lady soothingly.
I say it did.
Replied the other.
There was no thought about it. It had just... What's the matter?
His wife made no reply. She was watching the mysterious movements of a man outside, who, peering in an undecided fashion at the house, appeared to be trying to make up his mind to enter. In mental connection with the £200, she noticed that the stranger was well dressed and wore a silk hat of glossy newness. 3 times he paused at the gate, and then walked on again. A fourth time, he stood with his hand upon it, and then, with a sudden resolution, flung it open and walked up the path. Mrs. White, at the same moment, placed her hands behind her and, hurriedly unfastening the strings of her apron, put that useful article of apparel beneath the cushion of her chair. She brought the stranger, who seemed ill at ease, into the room. He gazed at her furtively and listened in a preoccupied fashion as the old lady apologized for the appearance of the room and her husband's coat, a garment which he usually reserved for the garden. She then waited as patiently as her sex would permit for him to broach his business. But he was at first strange trousers.
I come from Ma and Megan's.
The old lady stopped.
Hello? Hello? A little bit. Carving some pumpkins. I think so. As ready as I'm gonna be. Yep. I'll just wear my witch's hat, I think.